The Iron Laurel, Chapter 28, The Return to Tuscany. The shores of Tuscany, the Villa Silvia. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the olive groves that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Villa Silvia, nestled against the hills of Tuscany, stood as it always had, a serene haven far removed from the chaos of Rome. But for Marcellus, it had become more than just a home. It was a place where time slowed, where the weight of the world could be momentarily lifted, and where he could rebuild what had been fractured. As the horses' hooves clicked against the stone courtyard, Marcellus dismounted slowly, his mind heavy with the responsibilities he was about to face. His son Titus was here, waiting. They had not seen each other for months, but the bond between them, though strained by time, was stronger now, unbroken. The villa's main entrance, framed by the lush greenery of vineyards and groves, opened, and Titus stepped out, his form silhouetted against the fading light. The young man had grown since they last met. His shoulders were broader, his jaw firmer, and the gleam in his eyes reflected the pride of his Roman heritage, tempered by the wisdom of experience. He was no longer the wide-eyed boy Marcellus had left behind, but a man in his own right. Marcellus felt a weight in his chest as he looked at his son. So much had happened in his absence, so much that he had never explained. "Father," Titus greeted him, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the emotions beneath. He approached, his stride confident but filled with the unspoken tension of years apart. Marcellus smiled, his heart swelling as he opened his arms. "Titus," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've missed you." They embraced, and in that moment, the gulf between them, created by distance, duty and silence, seemed to vanish. Titus clapped his father's back with a solid thud, before pulling away to look at him properly. "So much has changed," Titus said softly, his eyes lingering on Marcellus's face, searching for the man who had left and the one who had returned. "You've changed." "Have," Marcellus replied, "but not for the worse, I hope." His smile was wry. Titus chuckled. "No, not worse. Stronger, perhaps." Marcellus nodded, feeling the truth of those words. He was stronger. But the strength wasn't merely in his muscles or the accolades he had gained, it was the strength to face the demons of his past, the strength to fight for his son, and for his future. Titus gestured to the side. "Come inside, there's food waiting, but you must be hungry after your journey." They walked together into the villa, where a meal had been prepared in celebration of Marcellus's return. Titus insisted that his father sit at the head of the table, the weight of their family's legacy still settled upon them, even if it was no longer a legacy bound by politics and war, but by something more personal and enduring. The meal and the question left unanswered. The meal was simple, but it was rich with the flavors of Tuscany, freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and the olives from the groves just outside. They ate in companionable silence, occasionally exchanging pleasantries, but with glances that showed both were fully aware of the depth of their conversation to come. Once the meal had concluded, they moved to the villa's terrace. The evening had settled in, and the stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Titus leaned against the stone railing, his arms crossed. "Father," he said after a long pause, "I know things have changed for you, what happened in Rome, what you've had to do. But there's something I need to know." He turned to his father. "What happened between you and Aisha? You've never spoken of her, not really." The question hit Marcellus like a sudden gust of wind. A reminder of the woman he loved. The woman who had saved him in ways that few could ever understand. His heart clenched, but he knew that now, in this moment of reunion, the time had come to speak the truth. The truth of Aisha. "I've not told you the whole story, have I?" Marcellus said, looking into the distance. The stars above shimmered, their cold light whispering of past and future alike. "No," Titus said quietly. "You haven't." Marcellus exhaled, steadying himself. "We met in Egypt for Actium. She was a priestess at the temple of Isis." A shadow seemed to fall over his face as he remembered. There had been no one, you understand, he added, looking at his son carefully. Since your mother died, since Helena. He trailed off as if recalling something distant, something sacred. For a moment he was back in Rome, standing at her funeral, feeling the weight of his own helplessness. Titus said nothing, but his eyes softened. He too had known loss. Marcellus continued, his voice steady but filled with unspoken weight. Then, after Actium, when I was lost at sea, when the gods seemed to have turned their backs on me, it was Aisha who saved me. She found me, took me in, and healed me, body, soul, and spirit. She was there when the storms of Neptune raged, and she stood between me and his fury. It was because of her that I survived. His voice dropped a little. She is not just a woman, Titus, she is. He hesitated. Titus frowned slightly, sensing something more than just love in his father's words. A goddess? Marcellus looked at his son, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. Yes, my son, a goddess indeed. Titus watched him carefully. A goddess? Was this the war-hardened soldier's way of describing the love of his life, or had his father truly seen something divine in her? But in his father's eyes there was no hesitation now. I'm glad for you, father, Titus said. She sounds like a woman worth loving. Marcellus chuckled, the sound rich with warmth. She is. And I will return to her, Titus. I will go to her and keep my promise. But I want you to know this, you are not alone in this world. Whatever happens next, you have me. And I will always be here for you. Titus clapped his father on the back. I know, father, and I'll be here when you are called back to Rome. Do what you must, but when the time comes, we'll fight side by side this time. Marcellus's heart swelled with pride. Indeed, my noble son, by the gods. Then he added, You've grown, my son, you've become a man of honor. They spent the following days training together. Each morning, Titus and Marcellus sparred with swords, their movements fluid and practiced. The clang of steel on steel echoed through the fields, a sound that had once been foreign to Titus, but had now become part of his rhythm. They fought as equals, pushing each other to new heights, both testing their strength, both learning from one another. By night they sat by the fire, talking of everything and nothing. They spoke of war, of politics, of strategy, but also of the great questions that had occupied men for centuries. Titus asked about the gods, about justice and duty. Marcellus spoke of wisdom, the nature of man's ambition, and the necessity of courage, not just in battle, but in life. Father, do you ever fear the gods? Titus asked one evening, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Marcellus leaned back considering. I have feared them, yes, but more than fear, I've learned that we must respect them. We must learn from the challenges they send us, even when they seem insurmountable. Titus nodded thoughtfully. It's not just about survival, is it? It's about living a life worth living. Exactly, Marcellus said with a smile. And that's something I hope you'll carry with you always. The days passed in a blur of sparring, discussions and shared memories. Titus grew in ways Marcellus had not expected. His son was not the boy who had once watched Marcellus leave for war. He was a young man, forged in the fires of experience, capable of holding his own. Then one morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Marcellus knew the time had come to return to Aisha. Titus, Marcellus said, standing before his son, I must go. Titus looked at him, a mischievous glint in his eye. I knew you would, he said with a wink, and don't worry, I'll be here when the call comes for you to save Rome. But next time, he added, looking at his father evenly, we will march together. We most certainly shall, my son, he said, embracing him again. Virtus et honor, my son. Virtus et honor, father, replied Titus with that angelic smile his father had once seen years before when his son, then little more than a baby, had poked his head around the door of the atrium. And I hope to one day meet this woman, Titus went on, this sea goddess of yours who has changed everything for you, he said, giving his father a warm, humorous smile. Ha, you shall, Titus, you shall, said Marcellus, clapping his son around the shoulders. She will love you dearly, have no doubts about that," he went on enthusiastically. "I have told her so much about you already. I promise you shall meet her when the time comes." "Easy, father," replied Titus, laughing. "Go back to your woman, your goddess of the sea, and I will meet her when the time comes." Marcellus nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace settle within him. "You're ready," he said, his voice filled with pride. Then with a final embrace they parted. "Virtus et honor, Titus's. Virtus et honor, father," a Roman valediction befitting father and son, two men forged out of steel as well as flesh. Marcellus made his way toward the ship that would take him back to Aetia, and Titus watched him go, knowing that no matter where his father's journey led, they would always stand together, no matter the distance or time. As the ship sailed away, Marcellus felt the pull of the sea, but also the pull of his destiny. The story of his life, of their lives, was far from over. And with Titus standing strong in the world, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it as father and son, united in the bonds that had forged them both.